Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me join the UNEP co-chairs David Pitt-Watson and Madeleine Ronquest in extending a very warm welcome to you here in Beijing on the occasion of this global roundtable, a meeting that has over the years gained more and more attention in both the financial world, but also in the world that my dear colleague Charles Achim just described, a world that he led in the run-up to Rio as Secretary General of the largest conference that the United Nations ever convened in Rio de Janeiro in the year 2012, with the heading of its outcome document, The Future We Want. It makes it a lot easier to follow Mr. Charles Achim, and in his eloquent and very profound speech that he just provided, he has already laid out much of the challenge that both science, politics, economics, but also our societies have defined for us as we think of the future that lies ahead of us. It is a tribute also to his vision that out of Rio emerged a vision for the global conversation about development, about the future of our economies, about the three dimensions of sustainable development, the economic, the social, and the financial, that despite perhaps not producing singular breakthroughs, is changing the conversation about the future of development on our planet. Indeed, as Mr. Charles has pointed out, a number of processes are now underway, and I also want to pay tribute here to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, who has always in his eloquence, in his humility, but also in his vision, captured very well the connection between the fundamental challenges that we will address in this meeting here and the link to the efforts by the international community to now formulate a new set of sustainable development goals. The conversation that is now happening between governments as a result of the Rio Summit will change the way that we think about development in the future. To some, this may not yet be visible, but let me assure you, the decision in Rio to establish a process that is now underway to define a set of sustainable development goals that will have universal application returns for the first time in 4 decades the Global Development Agenda, the United Nations, and, if you want, a global compact to the notion that every nation on this planet has a role to play, a responsibility to take, and a contribution to make. It is not by coincidence that also one of the few actual decisions in terms of implementation that were taken by heads of state and government in Rio concerned the implementation of a 10-year framework program for sustainable consumption and production. Again, a concept that may still seem abstract to some, but in fact puts at the center of the challenge of economic transformation the concept of sustainability from consumer and producer perspectives, beginning at the level of individuals, aggregated right up to national economies and the global economy. As we meet here in Beijing on the occasion of this global roundtable, let me first of all also pay tribute to the members of UNEP. As David and Madeleine, our co-chairs, pointed out, this is an idea that has a journey of almost 2 decades behind it. It is a leadership group in the financial sector, but also at the crossroads of public policy, sustainable development, and finance, that has shaped many of the global discussions that are today already considered to be mainstream in our discussions about finance and the economy. But let me tell you, if the first 20 years were an exciting journey, the next 10 are going to be far more disruptive and fundamental, because we are on the verge of having to confront a series of transformations that are unprecedented in terms of a global economy and in terms of events that are going to shape them. The agenda that emerged out of Rio was, in a sense, a policymaker's perspective of what is happening. And again, quoting both His Royal Highness and Charles Achim, I don't have to go into the further details about why some of these transformations we are talking about are going to be so fundamental. I have a written speech in which I make reference to a number of the latest scientific findings, and I will not take more time right now to take you through those, except to say that in the challenges that we confront today, for instance, a world of 7, 8, 9, 10 billion people, in which already today we are unable to provide adequate employment for hundreds of millions of people, in which we are having a recovery underway right now that is jobless. People are not going back to employment, even as our economies are recovering. A world in which too many people still fall below the poverty line. A world in which energy security and food security are not assured. On the contrary, we still have well over 1 billion of people who don't even have access to electricity. A continent such as Africa, where over 75% of its population do not, in the year 2013, have access to electricity. A world in which climate change is a phenomenon that we seem to be staring at and staring at and staring at, and capable and unable to act collectively to address it. A world in which just last week UNEP produced its latest emissions gap report, which pointed out that contrary to what we agreed in 2010, that we would begin to decouple, if you want, our economic development from emissions, we are not reducing the total emissions load in our atmosphere per annum. On the contrary, we're increasing it. We should be at 44 gigatons by the year 2020, and yet we have been going up currently to 49 gigatons, and we're heading to over 59 gigatons if this pattern continues. This is the end of any hope whatsoever of staying within a 2-degree scenario of global warming. It is literally in a window of the next 10 years that the world will determine whether it will take decisions that will transform the economic footprint of this planet, to be able to make decisions about the future that maintain options for future generations. These transformations have, in the work of UNEP and also in the context of the Rio Summit, been captured in the broader notions of the Sustainable Development Agenda, the objective of developing Sustainable Development Goals. And in the work of UNEP, we have tried to focus it even sharper on the question of how do you transform the current economic structure, infrastructure, and systems towards a green economy, an inclusive green economy in which we decouple economic development from resource consumption and pollution. A green economy in which the use of materials is no longer a matter of extraction and pollution, but rather of a circular economy, a concept that echoes so well to many discussions that China has been conducting. A transformation where basically investments do not pull us, as His Royal Highness put so nicely, in the wrong direction, but actually catapult us forward in the right direction. And precisely that the financial markets at the moment are not able and capable of delivering. We are beginning to see the economics of a transformation towards a green economy ever more clearly emerging across the strategic think tanks, across public policymakers, across the long-term agenda. The economics of renewable energy, for instance, is one that in just 10 years has gone from being something that is outside the reach of financial markets, investors, and national energy strategies, to actually becoming a central part. There are today 140 countries with clean energy policies in place. The total investment since 2006 in renewable energy has been over $1.3 trillion US, a number that was unimaginable in the year 2000, when the International Energy Agency and many of the international energy strategies argued that renewable energy was perhaps something that would begin to kick in the latter half of the 21st century. Today, 50% of the over $250 billion US invested last year in renewable energy investments are actually happening in developing countries, China being a premier investor amongst them. But at the same time, let me tell you that in the last 2 years, 2011 and 2012, Carbon Tracker Project looked at the carbon intensity of the portfolios of the London and New York Stock Exchange. And lo and behold, contrary to what we are trying to achieve, the carbon intensity has increased by 7% in London and by 37% in the New York Stock Exchange. When we talk about financing the transition towards a greener economy, let me also tell you that we are currently investing largely in the wrong directions. Beginning with public policy, where fossil fuel subsidies in our global economy range anywhere between $600 billion to $1,000 billion. Renewable energy subsidies somewhere between 60 to 70 billion. That means for every dollar that we try and bring into the marketplace to encourage people to make the transition towards renewable energy, we are spending 7 to 10 times more in making it cheaper for us to use fossil fuels. This is not rational public policy and economics. But let me tell you also that the dilemma is that the kinds of transformations we are talking about today are so fundamental and so large in scale that, quite frankly, public finance, be it in China, the United States, Brazil, Kenya, small island developing states, is simply not going to be adequate. As Mr. Shah said, in the lead-up to Rio, financing was central. But governments themselves are locked in an illusionary negotiation process that somehow between them they can finance these transitions. They cannot. Depending on which economy in the world you are, public finance accounts for between 20 to 30% of total economic expenditure in the economy. More or less 2/3 of economic activity in most of the world's economies take place outside the public government budgets. So our greatest challenge today, as also our co-chairs pointed out, is can we make finance follow the economics of a transition towards a green economy? An economics that is increasingly becoming self-evident, whether in terms of resource scarcity, whether in terms of the cost of pollution or the so-called externalities and environmental externalities that our economy produces today. For instance, the top global 100 externalities that have been measured per annum that arise to our global economy today amount to already $4.7 trillion. Now, this is being absorbed by people who died earlier. This is being absorbed by extractive industries going to new territories. This is being absorbed by going ever further out into the oceans to find the last fish stocks. But let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, whether the International Resources Panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, every single scientific body on this planet and every single economic think tank that is serious about taking the science and the empirical evidence into account can tell you today that the 20th century pathway of coping with these phenomena, of simply going somewhere else, further, deeper, higher, or hoping that somehow technology will solve all these problems, is on the wrong path. We do need to invest in, yes, technology, greater resource efficiency, less pollution, more recycling, circular economy. And that will have to happen with a significant and fast buying of also finance that we, in a sense, find in corporations, in the financial markets, and even in the hands of individual citizens, pension funds, and so on. If I tell you that at this very moment today, governments are struggling to even put together what they agreed they would work towards, namely $100 billion Green Climate Fund, $100 billion per year of the entire international community to enable, by 2020 annually, to accelerate actions on climate change. The fact of the matter is that we hardly managed to bring 20 to 30 billion to the table at this very moment, and that many remain doubtful whether $100 billion, just $100 billion, can be invested by 2020 annually by the international community through public financing. Let me put that in contrast and just tell you that the top 200 listed fossil fuel companies just last year invested over $674 billion in exploration and development of fossil fuel resources. So here you have a historical project of transformation to address climate change through public finance commitments, that are unable to mobilize even now $100 billion a year, and the top 200 listed companies in the fossil fuel economy being able to mobilize over $670 billion per annum in exploration and development of new oil and gas resources. Now, this is not the fault of the oil and gas companies. No, this is the challenge of our time, which is how do we redesign a financial system that can correspond to the scientific realities, to the public policy priorities and choices that our societies and economies wish to make, and enable both the private financial markets and sector to have an incentive to crowd into a series of technologies and transformations, be it in the energy, agriculture, transport, urbanization, infrastructure sectors, that will allow us to make these transitions happen. The UNEP Finance Initiative has over the years demonstrated time and again that there are many ways in which we can achieve this and many opportunities for addressing this. We will obviously draw on their work as we have done in the past because in many ways it has become the central challenge. Central, as Mr. Charles Kang said, in the recognition of governments, but perhaps postly or even more central in the recognition that governments alone, through public finance, have no chance to be able to mobilize the kinds of investments that are needed. But can we then work towards a financial system and signals that allow financial markets to become more aligned with these public policy choices and priorities, looking at regulatory oversight and responsibility in the reinterpretation also of financial institutions, such as fiduciary duties, information, disclosure, incentives, innovation, risk, capital regulation, securitization, green bonds, capital market initiatives that will allow, for example, such as China Banking Regulatory Commission's green credit guidelines to emerge as an instrument that can leverage and attract financing. Green bonds are now becoming something that also regional development banks are putting into the market. How do we begin to change the rules of the game that will allow private finance to emerge as an enabling and accelerating driver for transformation, as opposed to being locked into the brown economy of the 20th century that simply will exacerbate the kinds of challenges that we are aware of? It is with that in mind that we in the United Nations Environment Programme have been thinking about the challenges that lie ahead in terms of our green economy work. Many of you will be familiar with the Green Economy Report, and much of what we have been doing in the last couple of years is to work with countries in trying to identify where are the opportunities and challenges to make these transformations happen. The next frontier for our work in terms of policy analysis, in terms of research, and in terms of learning lessons will be to look at that relationship between public policy and financial systems and financial markets, between public finance and private finance, and how we can begin together to review, rethink, redesign, recalibrate the financial systems from the regulatory aspect right through to the products, for instance, such as an insurance product that can underwrite a much greater investment in forestry, as also UNEP has been working on, in order to create the market opportunities but also the financial returns that will allow a quantum leap in public finance. Over the next 18 months, we hope to put in place a series of processes, including an inquiry that will look at the question of the green economy, of financial systems, of design options, of lessons learned, and we hope to contribute to the body of knowledge but also to the policy agenda, informed particularly by financial regulators, who must increasingly recognize that theirs is not only financial stability in the traditional sense, but actually how financial stability can begin to define an economic stability agenda that factors into it the risks that we are also seeing emerging as ever more central to our economies, be it climate change, resource scarcity, pollution, and others. And it is here, and I end with this remark, ladies and gentlemen, that we are meeting in a country that is driven both by the necessity and even the pain and the cost of environmental pollution and the heavy price it has imposed on this generation, that some of the most fundamental processes of rethinking economic policy are actually now underway. It is here, through your days in Beijing, that I hope you will get a sense that the story about environment and development and sustainable development in China is not only that which you see on the news in the evenings when the air is not, as it is at the moment, blue sky quality. It is actually the transformation of China's development model that you see articulated here with the concept of ecological civilization. We are in the midst of a nation, in the midst of a moment in which one of the great nations on this planet is actually rethinking the model of development, and it will have consequences and repercussions across the globe, as it will have for every Chinese citizen in this country. And by sheer coincidence, you are in this city at the very moment when within the next 24 hours you will get a glimpse of about how serious the leadership of this country is in making this agenda a central driver for the future. Watch this space, because it is the space that will define the future of our economies, the future of our financial markets, the future of your financial institutions, and by extension, hopefully, a more sustainable future for us all. Thank you.